Happy birthday, Alexander Graham Bell. Today, you would be 172 years old, and among all of the incredible inventions in our world, I credit you, Alexander Graham Bell, with the most amazing, the invention of the telephone. On March 10th, 1876, Bell uttered those now famous words to his assistant, Thomas Watson. "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." And the rest, as we say, is history. Bell opened up the world of communication with that invention. But unfortunately, I am afraid that if Alexander Graham Bell were alive today, he might be a little bit disappointed at how the telephone has evolved. It is no secret that we have become a hunched-over, thumb-texting, silent culture. Our communication is often silent through texts and emails, and when we are forced to listen to someone speak, it has become taxing. Over 50 years ago, plays were 3 acts in length. A night at the theater easily took up 3.5, 4 hours. Today, play selections across the city are based on brevity. The rule of thumb is no longer than a 45-minute first act, followed by a very brief intermission and a 30-minute second act with no third act. An evening at the theater now is 1.5 to 2 hours long. Why must we have such a short period of time? Well, because people can no longer be expected to sit and listen for that long at a stretch of time. The same thing has happened in education. Students are only expected to listen for about 15 minutes before being allowed to move around the room. But poor listening skills don't just impact our entertainment and our education. It impacts our value, our worth. When we don't feel like anyone is listening to us in our personal relationships, there's a very strong negative effect. We all want to feel heard. In his book, Caring Enough to Hear and Be Heard, David Augsburger makes this powerful statement. Being heard is so close to being loved that it is for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable. To say something you value deeply to another and to have him or her value it equally by listening to it carefully and appreciatively is the most universal way of exchanging social interest or demonstrating affection. Take a moment and assess your listening skills. Do you give others your undivided attention? Do you listen when they are talking to you, or are you looking somewhere else or looking down at your phone? Are you sending the message to the person who's engaged in a conversation with you that you're with him or her, or that you get what is being discussed, or are you just waiting for your turn to talk? Well, there's another kind of listening that I want us to think about today, and that is the listening that happens on a personal level. When we listen to ourselves, when we listen to that inner voice. Some people call it listening to your gut. So consider this scenario. An upper-level manager named Jim interviews a candidate for a middle management position. And on the surface, this candidate was a star, enthusiastic, mature, intelligent, articulate, prepared, experienced, and a visionary. After consulting with other upper-level management peers who also interviewed this candidate, hiring him seemed a no-brainer, and yet Jim hesitated. He couldn't explain what he felt. He just didn't feel like this guy should be hired. But the references were excellent, and he was qualified for the position, and the other colleagues were in favor of hiring him, so he was hired. And 6 months later, he was accused of stealing from the company, and he was fired. Jim was so disappointed in himself for failing to listen to his inner voice. And I'm sure each one of us in this room has been in the position of failing to listen to our hunches. Ever wonder why we don't listen to our hunches, our instincts? Well, I don't have any proof, but I think it's because we are so evidence-driven that we don't want to rely on an impression without proof. And secondly, we are swayed by the opinions of others around us that contradict our instincts. We need to develop the skill of listening to that inner voice. For some, it is a moral compass. For others, it is the voice of God. Sometimes it's our own voice of reason trying to help us solve problems or make decisions. Sometimes it gets us out of stupid situations that we get ourselves into. Several years ago, I traveled alone to a funeral in Akron, Ohio, where I grew up. And following the service, I realized that I was very near the area where my ex-husband's grandparents once lived in a trailer. And so I had some time and the weather was kind of nice, and I decided, I think I'll drive by there and see if I can find their trailer and maybe take a picture of it and send, on my phone, Alexander Graham Bell, and send it to my ex-husband. He would enjoy that. So as I got out of my car and I was kind of looking, was it the second trailer, was it the third one? And I was trying to figure out which one it was, and I thought I had honed in on which one was their former home, when out of that very trailer came a gentleman, and he began a conversation with me. And I told him the purpose of my visit, and he invited me into his trailer, and I went in to his trailer alone, where no one in the entire world knew where I was. I admired the low ceiling, the closed curtains, the darkness within, and suddenly I heard a very strong voice within me that said, "Get the freak out of the trailer! What are you doing?" Now, I had seen enough Criminal Minds episodes to know that I was in a really, really stupid situation. I assessed my surroundings. He was between me and the tiny door. I moved toward the door as I pretended to gaze at a small figurine on the end table. "Oh, this is pretty." And I started for the door, and he suddenly lowered his voice. "You don't need to go. I'm not going to hurt you." My blood ran cold. I was suddenly in the middle of a really bad movie. Just how far away was I from a medical table with a bright light, some duct tape, and some sharp objects? 2 more steps, and I was out the door. He followed me out into the bright sunlight, and he continued, "I thought we just might have some coffee or some lunch." No, I gotta go," I said. I got into the safety of my car. And as I drove away, I scolded myself for making such a silly choice and going into that trailer. But then I praised myself for listening to that guiding voice within me that got me out of that situation unscathed. Now, if somebody could check on Marcy, this is the first time she's ever heard that story. When we honor our true selves by listening to our inner voice, we are getting connected to our soul. We are learning to follow our heart. In 2016, Steven Spielberg gave the commencement address at Harvard University. His message was entitled, "Listen to that voice that tells you what you could do." And in his address, he talked about how life is filled with character-defining moments. He said that when he was 18 years old, he knew exactly what he wanted to do, but he didn't know who he was. And he said, well, how could I know who I was? How could any of us know at that age? Because for the first 25 years of our lives, we are trained to listen to voices that are not our own. Parents and professors fill our heads with wisdom and information, and then employers and mentors take their place and explain how this world really works. And usually these voices of authority make sense, but sometimes doubt starts to creep into our heads and into our hearts. And Spielberg goes on to say that he needed to listen to his own voice. He said that at first that internal voice that he needed to listen to was hardly audible, and that he was very untrained, and it was hardly noticeable. But then he started paying more attention, and his intuition kicked in. And he said this, I want to be clear that your intuition is different from your conscience. They work in tandem, but here's the distinction. Your conscience shouts, here's what you should do, while your intuition whispers, here's what you could do. Listen to that voice that tells you what you could do. Nothing will define your character more than that. How do we get better at listening to our intuition, our gut, our heart, the voice of God? I thought you'd never ask. I think we need to honor what Albert Einstein calls our sacred gift. Here are some brilliant words from Albert Einstein. The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We've created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. Author, speaker, and mindfulness teacher Debbie Toomey offers these 3 suggestions. The first is to trust. Have faith that you have the voice inside you. You know you do. You've heard it. It's guiding you. It's giving you ideas. It's solving problems. And secondly, then exercise. Build your intuitive muscle by talking to your voice, testing it out, and tuning into its guidance and really heeding it. And finally, love. Trust that your intuition is love-based. It speaks the language of your heart's desires. Your intuition, your inner voice wants what is best for you. There is a voice inside of you that is leading you to your highest and your best path. Perhaps that voice is God's voice. Perhaps it is your soul speaking to you. Whatever it is, it's filled with love, and it wants to protect you. I hope you'll listen to it and trust it. It's a voice filled with solutions, with ideas, with dreams. It is the voice that knows you best. Author Shel Silverstein has written, there is a voice inside of you that whispers all day long. I feel this is right for me. I know that this is wrong. No teacher, preacher, parent, friend, or wise man can decide what's right for you. Just listen to the voice that speaks inside. Have a great Sunday. Go in peace. Amen.